So, Honorable Speaker, I reply.
Well, honorable members, I'll defer putting of the question to a later time. Next order.
Order number 21, motion, formulation of a policy on power subsidies for export-oriented agricultural production.
Honorable members, that order number 21 is by the Honorable Gathoni, who is not in the House this afternoon, so it is hereby deferred. Next order.
Order number 22, motion, motion to outlaw discriminatory practices in learning institutions that impede access to basic education.
The Honorable Duncan Madenge.
Honorable Speaker, Honorable Speaker, kindly guide me on the direction.
Please approach the table. Well, the fact is that you are the mover of this motion number 22, so you can make a decision. If you are not ready, we'll advise you on what to do. Okay, you are ready? You may proceed.
Honorable Speaker, Madam Speaker, education in this country under the Basic Education Act is mandatory and compulsory.
Before you debate, I'll ask you to move. You move it as it is in the order paper. This is your motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move the motion. I beg to move the motion to outlaw discriminatory practices in learning institutions that impede access to basic education. Honorable Speaker, aware that Article 53(1)(b) of the Constitution guarantees every child the right to free and compulsory basic education, and Article 21(2) obligates the state to take legislative and policy measures to ensure the progressive realization of socio-economic rights, which include the right to education under Article 43(1)(f). Further aware that the Basic Education Act, Cap 211, obligates the state and school administrators to ensure equitable access, retention, and completion in basic education, and prohibits administrative barriers that exclude learners. Noting that the Children Act, Cap 141, requires the best interest of the child to be the primary consideration in actions concerning children, including in education. Recognizing that Kenya's international and regional obligations under Article 2 and 28 of the United Nations Convention to the Rights of the Child, Article 13 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO Convention against discrimination in education, which requires states to ensure education is accessible, non-discriminatory, and free from economic and social barriers. Concerned that certain designated outlets, that certain administrative practices in schools, particularly compulsory sourcing of uniforms from designated outlets, exclusion of learners for inability to pay school feeding programs, remedial class charges, all other non-statutory levies have the effect of imposing economic and administrative barriers, and in some instances, creating possible avenues for abuse of office and improper financial benefit. Now, therefore, this House resolves that, 1, all basic education institutions shall allow purchase of school uniforms from the open market, as long as they generally conform to the school design and standards, and further, that any attempt to monopolize, control, or otherwise influence the supply of uniforms is unlawful. 2, all learners shall have uninterrupted access to school regardless of inability to pay for school feeding programs, remedial charges, development levies, or any other charges not expressly provided for under the Basic Education Act or any other regulation approved by the Cabinet Secretary responsible for education. 3, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, in consultation with the Teachers Service Commission, shall within 90 days develop a comprehensive regulatory and enforcement framework, including a monitoring mechanisms, a complaints and redress system for parents and learners, as well as a nationwide public awareness program to ensure full compliance. And 3 and 4, provide that any person, all institution, action or policy that violates this resolution shall be subject to disciplinary action under the relevant statutes, including the Teachers Service Commission Act, the Basic Education Act, the Children's Act, and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission Act. Madam Speaker, emanating from the foregoing, it is clear that both our Constitution and our nation's commitments under international treaties, the Children's Act, and the Basic Education Act, every Kenyan child has the right, and it is not just the right, it is also compulsory for a child to attend school uninterrupted. This is the right of every Kenyan child, irrespective of the ability or the inability of economic ability or inability of their parents. Honorable Speaker, today we send out our chiefs to go to the villages and pick children who are not in school, take them to school, and actually take legal action against their parents. But when a child has been sent home because they do not have a uniform, what are we saying to this child? When a child is sent out of class because on that day their parent did not have 20 shillings to pay for school fees, for lunch feeding program, and unfortunately the child is sent away from school in the morning, not during lunch hour. What are we telling this child? We are discriminating against this child. We are punishing them because their parent apparently is poor. We are affecting their self-esteem. Bullying we are subjecting this child to bullying by other students on account of poverty. We are permanently affecting the emotional state of this child. Yet, we have provided in the Constitution that every child has a right to education. Yet, we have provided under the Basic Education Act that education in this country is compulsory. And therefore, Madam Speaker, it is time for this House to pronounce itself on the economic barriers and other barriers that have been placed in front of the Kenyan child, denying them a constitutional right, a legal right, an obligation under the UN conventions, and the African Charter on the Right of the Child. Madam Speaker, when schools insist that you can only attend this school because you can only attend this school after purchasing the uniform from that school, how competitive is the pricing of that uniform? Why do we allow our schools to be converted into avenues perpetuating the interest of cartels in the uniforms industry in this country? Why do we convert our learning institutions into trading centers to push personal economic interest and personal gain? Madam Speaker, our students and their parents are told, unless you go and purchase uniforms from school distributor XYZ, your uniform is not accepted. Madam Speaker, you and I had a local foodie in the village who made your uniform. It was acceptable during that time. How come today it is not acceptable? Madam Speaker, we have a huge industry in Nairobi, Uhuru Market, where ordinary men and women, ordinary hustlers, make uniforms in this country at very affordable prices. Yet those uniforms are not acceptable in our schools. Yet we want to speak about technical skills, self-employment for our young people, and then immediately we place a barrier that your goods are not good enough for utilization by your own child. Madam Speaker, how can a tailor who makes uniforms, who makes clothes for other people, not be good enough to make a uniform for their own child in this country? Madam Speaker, it is these barriers that I seek to have removed. Madam Speaker, a parent who cannot afford a meal for their child, why should that child be punished by being excluded from class and from school? Feeding programs are supposed to be compassionate. They cannot be punishment. They cannot be a source of exclusion. They cannot be a source of discrimination. Yet we want to produce a just society, and a society that is giving the lowest child in this country an opportunity to thrive. Education is the only equalizer for our children. How do we confine some children to a lack of education? Because they come from the slums of Wetemere in Nyeri town, because they come from Korogosho, because they come from Kibera, because they come from Mukuru kwa Jenga, because they come from Nyalenda. How can we? And Gashororo in Juja, Thika and Thika. Madam Speaker, these issues, we must bring them to an end. And this has nothing to do with the political persuasion or the political party or the political inclination of the different members of this House. It is the welfare of the Kenyan child. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I want to beg my colleagues
that we have had these conversations in this house for too long. We bring the CS for education here. He stands and says that this is the position of the ministry, but, Madam Speaker, this week, our children are going back to school for second term. There are children, unfortunately, who will be sent back by school principals because their uniform apparently has faded, because apparently the parent has not paid money for lunch. They report in the morning, lunch is 6 hours later, but the child is sent home at 8 o'clock in the morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to plead with this House that it is time for us to speak for the Kenyan child. Madam Speaker, I want to plead with my colleagues that learning in our schools is supposed to happen between 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock or 4:30. The curriculum, if it cannot be covered within the normal learning hours, let us reduce the workload so that we can eliminate the practice of remedial lessons. A child is sent home because their parent could not pay remedial lesson. They stay home for a week. The remedial lessons are offered. Eventually, the parent has to pay the entire fees. This child is not offered, given an opportunity to be taught for the remedial lessons that were covered. A child is sent home on account of lunch feeding program, stays home for 2 weeks. When eventually the parent pays, the child comes back. They do not consume the food for the 2 weeks they were out of school. These practices, Madam Speaker, burden my heart. They disturb my conscience. And therefore, honorable members, today I request you that we stand for that parent who today woke up in the morning, went to look for kibarua in a construction site, but they did not get, but their child deserves to access education uninterrupted. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the mamafua who woke up in this morning, went around our residences, did not get a job, but their child deserves an education. I want to speak for the border rider, Madam Speaker, who since morning, on account of the rain in Nairobi, has not been able to carry one passenger, yet their child deserves an education. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the children of Kitui, where there has been conflict and there has been death. The livelihoods of in their rural community has been disrupted. Their children still need education. I want to speak for the child of the pastoralists whose animals were stolen last night. The entire income of that household taken away because of cattle rustlers. But their children still deserve an education. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the border rider who had an accident last evening. Their border is no longer on the road. They are confined to a hospital bed, yet their children deserve an education. Madam Speaker, the examples are endless. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the parents who have cancer, confined to hospital beds. They can no longer actively go to gainful employment, but their children deserve an education. Madam Speaker, these examples are heart-wrenching. It is time that this House started passing legislation and regulations that not only impose punishment on the ordinary people, but they go right into the center of the realization of the rights that we have given to our people, to our children, in the Constitution, in our international commitments, and other statutes. Madam Speaker, I had long nights wondering whether we should abolish uniforms. Yes. But the uniform, when we look at our life in Nyeri town, illicit brews are being sold and manufactured in Nyeri town center.
Who is shouting there? Member for Kisumu, I think you wait for your time. I heard a loud yes. So you are the one who is out of order. You're out of order. I'll give you a chance to speak.
So, Madam Speaker, I realized that the uniform is a tool also for protecting our children. Today, we have young children being subjected to GBV, including rape and murder. Yet they are in uniforms. Suppose they weren't. And on account of that, Madam Speaker, I was convinced beyond doubt that the uniform remains to be an important tool in our society and in the education and in the protection of our children. The question, therefore, is how to ensure it does not become a barrier. A good thing does not have negative unintended consequences that result in discrimination, in disenfranchisement, and designing our children into the cycle of poverty, looking at the backgrounds from where they come from. Madam Speaker, allow me to request the Honorable Koibori, MP Juja, to second.
Member for Juja, Honorable Koimburi.
I do second.
Please move to the next mic.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I second the motion.
I don't need to propose anything. Okay, honorable members. I now propose that aware that agriculture I take this again, honorable members. I propose that aware that Article 53(1)(b) of the Constitution guarantees every child the right to free and compulsory basic education, and Article 21(2) obligates the state to take legislative and policy measures to ensure progressive realization of socio-economic rights, which include the right to education, and Article 43(1)(f). Further aware that the Basic Education Act, Cap 211, obligates the state and school administrators to ensure equitable access, retention, and completion in basic education, and prohibits administrative barriers that exclude learners, noting that the Children Act, Cap 141, requires the best interest of the child to be put to be the primary consideration in all actions considering children, including in education, recognizing Kenya's international and regional obligations, and Article 2 and 28 of the United Nations on the rights of the child, Article 13 of the International Convention on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 11 of the African Charter on the rights and welfare of the child, and the United Educational, Scientific, Cultural and Organization UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, which requires states to ensure education is accessible, non-discriminatory, and free from economic or social barriers. Concerned that certain administrative practices in schools, particularly compulsory sourcing of uniforms from designated outlets, exclusion of learners for inability to pay school feeding programs, remedial classes, charges, or other non-statutory levies have the effect of imposing economic and administrative barriers, in some instances creating possible avenues for abuse of office and improper financial benefit. Now, therefore, this House resolves that 1, all basic education institutions shall allow purchase of school uniforms from the open market, as long as they generally conform to the school design and standards, and further, that any attempt to monopolize, control, or otherwise influence the supply of school uniforms is unlawful. 2, all learners shall have uninterrupted access to school regardless of inability to pay school fees, feeding programs, remedial charges, development levies, or any other charges not expressly provided for under the Basic Education Act or any other regulation approved by the Cabinet Secretary responsible for education. 3, the Cabinet Secretary responsible for education, in consultation with the Teacher Service Commission, shall within 90 days, 1, develop a comprehensive regulatory and enforcement framework, including monitoring mechanisms, complaints and redress systems for parents and learners, as well as nationwide public awareness programs to ensure full compliance. And 2, provide that any person or institution, action or policy that violates this resolution shall be subject to disciplinary action under the relevant statutes, including the Teacher Service Commission Act, the Basic Education Act, and the Children's Act, and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission Act. Honorable members, those who are interested to debate in this can hit the intervention button. I'll start with the Honorable Kasim Tandaza, member for Matuga.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipatia hii fursa. Wacha kwanza nianze kwa kumpatia pongezi Mheshimiwa Madhenge kwa kufikiria na kuja na mswada huu ambao kusema kweli unadhalilisha wazazi, unadhalilisha watoto, unadhalilisha viongozi, unadhalilisha serikali. Tunajua kwamba katika mfumo wetu wa elimu ni kwamba masomo ya msingi ni bure. Kuanzia ile shule ya msingi ambayo sasa wanasema inaanzia grade ya 1 mpaka ya 6, kisha baadaye kuna ile ya 7, ya 8 na ya 9. Serikali inatoa ruzuku kwa watoto hawa ambayo inatakikana iwe ndio imesimamia yale masomo yao. La kushangaza kama Mheshimiwa Madhenga alivyozungumza ni kwamba licha ya kuwa pesa hizi hufika mashule, hata ijapo kuchelewa, lakini bado huwa zinafika, kamati za shule pamoja na mwalimu mkuu, kwa sababu, na hili nitalizungumza, ya ufisadi, kwa sababu hutaka fedha za ziada. Zile zinazoletwa na serikali huwa zinakuja kwa kutumia maalum, kama ni kulipia stima, kama ni kulipia mishahara kidogo, kama ni kununua vifaa, kila pesa inakuja na kiwango chake. Lakini kwa sababu wao wanahitaji fedha zaidi, aidha za kutembelea katika shughuli zingine ambazo sio ratiba ya kiserikali, basi huweka hizi pesa zingine za watu walipe, ambazo ni mzigo mkubwa kwa wazazi na wazazi wengi hawajimudu. Mimi nikiwa hapa, jana nikiwa kwangu katika maeneo bunge nimepata watoto wengi sana, kuanzia wale ambao wako katika shule ya msingi kwa matatizo haya ambayo Mheshimiwa Madenge huu mswada ameweza kuyanukuu, kwamba wamefukuzwa kwa sababu kama alivyotanguliza uniform. Na hili swala la haya mavazi yameendelea kuanzia shule ya msingi mpaka shule hizi ambazo ni za sekondari ya chini. Tunajua kwamba anayesoma ni mtoto na mtoto ni akili. Sidhani kama kuna utafiti wowote ambao ulifanywa kwamba ikiwa hujavaa uniform basi akili yako pia nayo haishiki masomo. Sidhani kama kuna utafiti wowote ambao ulishafai kufanywa kwamba mtoto kufanya vizuri ni lazima awe amevaa viatu ndio aweze kufanya vizuri. Mimi nitasema Mheshimiwa Spika kwamba ijapokuwa nilisoma katika zile shule za kimataifa, nilivaa kiatu kwa mara ya kwanza nilipoenda kidato cha kwanza. Nilibeba viatu vyangu katika sanduku nikiwa sina uhakika kama cha mguu wa kulia ni kipi na cha kushoto ni kipi, mpaka nilipopatiwa kwamba sasa naweza kwenda darasani ndio nikavaa, na nilifanya vizuri, na ndio maana niko hapa, na wengine na imani walisomea katika mazingira haya. Kama ingekuwa kulikuwa na vikwazo kutoka wakati wetu, sidhani kama wengi wangekuwa wameweza kusoma na kufika kile kiwango ambacho baadhi yetu waliweza kufika. Kwa nini nyakati hizi tunaweza kuwekea wazazi vikwazo na watoto kuwakosesha haki yao ya kimsingi kwa vitu ambavyo havihusiaji na masomo? Mimi mwenyewe nakumbuka wakati nikiwa katika shule ya msingi, haikuwa karibu na ilikuwa ninaenda, siwezi, wakati huo hakukuwa na haya matarajio ya kwamba watu watakula shule. Kwa hivyo mtu alikuwa anaruhusiwa kubeba chakula chake, aidha utakula peke yako ama utagawanyia mwenzako, na kama hauna utakaa na bado utasoma. Ni nani aliyesema kwamba ni lazima mtoto, licha ya kuwa fee ishalipwa, na sisi kama wajumbe hapa tunahakikisha maofisi yetu kupitia ule mfumo wa kulipia basari, watoto wanalipiwa, lakini bado wanafukuzwa eti kwa sababu hawajalipia chakula. Ni nani aliyesema kwamba nina lazima nile kidheri ndio niweze kusoma kemia vizuri ama niweze kusoma biolojia vizuri? Kwa nini wasiruhusiwe kubeba chakula chao, licha ya kwamba pengine hata si lazima? Na lile swali ambalo lilizungumza, ujue wakati huo basari ya CDF tayari ishalipwa, serikali nayo ishatuma pesa zake, lakini bado mtoto yuko nyumbani. Na wakati akiruhusiwa, ukipata zile pesa za ruzuku za kumregesha, hapatiwi nafasi ya kuwa yeye asomeshwe peke yake vile hakuwako. Kwa hivyo hizi pesa zinaenda bure, pesa ya serikali inaenda bure, ile yetu ambayo inapitia katika mfuko wa CDF inaenda kwa mashule na haitumiki, na ile hali bado itakuwa inadaiwa hakula, hakusoma, ambayo inachangia matokeo mabaya. Na sijui kwa nini zile bodi zinazosimamia shule zinafurahia kwamba watoto wafanye vibaya kwa sababu hawako madarasani, ili mradi tu wao waweze kupata pesa za ziada, ili wakiwa na mikutano waweze kujilipa marupurupu ambayo wanafurahikia. Hili ni jambo la kuhuzunisha, Mheshimiwa Spika, na ndio maana nikasema Mheshimiwa Madenge, huu ni mswada ambao ni wa kuzungumziwa, lakini ingetaka tuweze kutengeneza sheria, kuwe na mswada maalum wa kutengeneza sheria kwamba endapo kamati, bodi ya shule, kwa sababu yule mwalimu mkuu mara nyingi atasema ni bodi ya shule ndio imesema waregeshwe nyumbani. Endapo bodi ya shule itawaregesha nyumbani watoto na vitu ambavyo sio lazima, basi moja kwa moja ile bodi ya shule iweze kuvunjiliwa mbali, kwa sababu haisaidii serikali, haisaidii mzazi, haisaidii mtoto, hata haijisaidii wenyewe katika kuchangia kuwa na matokeo bora. Hili swala la uniform, kwa nini mtu wakati anaenda kama ni kidato cha kwanza lazima aende na uniform mpya? Kwa sababu mimi ikiwa na watoto wangu kwa mfano 3 ama 2, mmoja ashamaliza na anaenda shule ile ile, na uniform ya yule mtoto mwingine bado ni nzuri, haijachafuka, haijararuka. Hata kama imeraruka, kuna uwezo wa kurekebishwa. Mbona iwe ni lazima kwamba lazima awe na uniform mpya, awe na kiatu kipya, ambapo wakati alipomaliza ile tunaita grade la 6 labda alikuwa na kiatu tayari kizuri, na sasa ni miezi mitatu tu kitambo aende grade ile nyingine ya 7, lakini analazimishwa sasa awe na kiatu mpya, na bila hicho hawezi kuruhusiwa kwenda. Nakubali na Mheshimiwa Mathenge kwamba